A warm welcome you back to this show, ThinkTech Hawaii's Humane Architecture, happening to be the 354th episode. And on YouTube, you're around the 21,500 viewer. If you go to our ThinkTech website, it's going to be way more. So we're back here after almost a month of pause with this Trouble Trilogy panel here. But in the meanwhile, we had you, Jay Fidell, very important, go to the 9th Island in Vegas to go to all your colleagues, the National Broadcasting Convention there, and bring back even more goodies to be even better, getting better every day, your motto. So welcome back, Jay. And welcome back, Pedro, who is with us from Barcelona. Right. And we had a little bit of a clash we want to share, Jay, because after or before last show, about a month ago, you said, Martin, I can't be on any of your shows, on all of your shows, on some, yes. And also, why are we stuck with Barcelona? So obviously, we're back to both of that. We have you back, and we're back to Barcelona. But your point was well taken. We should first take it actually out of Barcelona. Because before we get back in, and this is showing us here in this country, just hot off our phones on news media here that pop up on although the Washington Post shouldn't pop up anymore because we want to, Bezos had not been nice to democracy. But there he is. This is his way actually trying to get me back on my phone. So we're seeing here how the government is meddling in housing and tries to have people who are from other places, which actually in America everyone is, because the original people we got almost rid of, these Native Americans, right? So everyone we're talking here in America is from elsewhere. And then also our very ambitious, not giving up, a housing senator, Stanley Cheng, is giving us these news here, which are not good news, and saying we're losing oversight over affordable housing. And not any better on the other end of the world where I'm from. So this is my little German lesson. Don't worry, you don't have to read all that. I give you the gist of it. But it basically says here on the top right, and this is the Bavarian. So whenever I'm here with my shirt, it's Aloha Bavaria. And don't worry, Jay, I'm going to get back in exactly the right position that I was before. So this is the Bavarian radio news app. And it says affordable housing is the social task of our times. And this is written into the new coalition contract of the new government in Germany. Well, and then down there it says it's easier said than done, because one guy was saying here, it actually says dwelling or living, being sheltered is a human right. Sie können nicht wohnen means you cannot not dwell, or be sheltered. But of course, we know very well here in Hawaii that you very much can, because we have all these people on the street. On the left, no better news, because it says all the public funding for that is actually drained. And that gets us to the third place, why we have you here, Pedro, but we got this from you, Jay, one day, the New York Times. You sent me that, so we can all read it. So, once again, here we are back again, you, Pedro, and your Barcelona, which you have been at for 20 years because you're originally from Peru. You are the ground zero. Don't you like that to hear? And so here, that was actually 2 years ago. So when I went to Barcelona the year before that and the year after, I was going online and checking what was going on as far as social housing, and there you popped up with this article that you wrote that while ago. And then I was very lucky that you also gave tours, and we talked about that in the previous shows. And that's why I put myself into this awesome office of not local, but lacol, as you taught me and told me about. And so this is this awesome cooperative architectural office that we got so excited about. And they do see these cool projects like that one that we've been talking about. But we have a couple slides left, because there's also this cool culinary part in there. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about what that was about and what the guy showed us all, Pedro.
Okay, so that was the guy is very peculiar and very enthusiastic, because I've been there 2 or 3 times, and he's always like very proud to show the place. It's basically part of this complex that was old factories that were remodeled and refurbished to house a series of cooperative companies, let's say, or organizations that have very different functions. So we have the architecture office, for example. We have a library. We have a group of lawyers. They all work as a cooperative on their own. And this one is like a restaurant bar, and it also has like a small space for concerts, a small stage for concerts. And I think it ends up working as like a discotheque, and everything, of course, very like alternative, so that you can see the stage on the lower part, and then what they just take off all the tables when they want to allow people to dance. And it's like a multi-purpose space, but all, of course, related to music, to food, to drinks, and things like that. So, for example, on this upper side, it's directly connected to the offices that are on the rest of the product. So it can be used as a dining space by people in the office. For example, they're not even forced to consume the food they sell there. They can just use the space and bring their own food. Of course, if they do want, they do serve menus at noon. So you can buy the food there, or you can bring your own food if you work, of course, in the cooperatives in the building. No, otherwise you can just go in and visit like we did, and they're very happy to show you all the details. And it's basically like a relatively very simple space, and it has a lot of details, like gadget-like details. So you have a special place and a special mechanism to put all the tables away and have all free space, and it looks like the tables and the elements disappear. So they have a place to store the chairs, the tables, and all the elements. That thing you see right under the guy who's actually moving them is tables that are going through the bar, for example. So they have holes. So the I forgot the name in English. What are they called? The legs of the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ah, okay, so it's the same. I was
Yeah.
I was looking for a different word in English. I don't know why. So the legs of the table, they go through the bar. There's some holes that, and there's a lot of elements that work like that. And the people who work there are very pleased about this because they say, oh, the architects were really smart and they designed a lot of details and a lot of gadgets that are very practical for our daily use. And if you look at it, the space is like also like very simple. It has almost this industrial look because that's kind of the spirit of the place. It's a recycle factory, basically. So they don't want to hide this fact.
Absolutely. So the one of the references top there is to us here, because we had a nice low key oceanfront restaurant that was called Shorebird. You remember that, Jay? You could cook your fish and your meat on this open, grill. You order it and you can grill it yourself. You had a pretty good buffet, all included for $20. Now, like an eggs Benedict is like that price, so it got gentrified. And it actually had, what blew me away, it had ceiling fans that were belt driven. So there was one motor, and it just like the streetcars were back then, where the power was centralized. That was just great. And they ripped it all out. And I was walking by one morning, I saw this ceiling acoustical panel, and I chatted them up, and they said, yeah, our client, so the restaurant owner, has shipped this in from Germany. This is really cool stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, no, this is not cool at all. Right. So we have come to the point, is like, globalism is great in several ways, especially opening minds. But as far as getting stuff from the other end of the world, not so much. So we should really think about local materials, which that is over there, but not for us. And and Jay, we just heard, I think if you would have actually stayed and not, after Madrid in 1965, shipped yourself over here, I think you would have ended up in there and would have been one of the lawyers in there. I think that would have been a very good fit, right? From all you hear.
Oh, for the good old days, Martin.
So we see here again down there this kind of multifunctionality, Pedro, that you're talking about. So with a relatively moderate, limited budget to do the most with the least, and always. So this is basically a courtyard, and it can be transformed into an auditorium that we see here. And so something that they really dwell on is that we don't do enough here, and that is shade, dealing with shade. And it's not nearly as often as sunny as it is here. So we have way more demand, but you can really see how shade is an integral part of, we've been talking about this, and you also see in the back these sort of stack effect winter gardens, greenhouses that have the vents open so the hot air can, which you shared, it's their own laboratory, it's trial and error, and they were open to us, the architects, and saying it doesn't always work, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't always try, right? That's kind of the gist.
And an ironic detail about the fact that these greenhouse spaces don't work as well as expected. I asked him, this might be because there was a lot of friction because the greenhouse elements are slightly taller than the factory sheds. So the city council wouldn't allow them to make them taller because they were afraid it was like interfering with the profile of the original building. And I asked him, "Do you think that's the reason why they don't work?" And he said, "For sure, that's the reason."
Well,
I mean,
we know that
if they had allowed us to have them 1 meter higher,
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
sure they would have worked better.
We call it chimney effect, and we know that something that's like a stump is not a chimney. A chimney is tall, right? It's as simple as that. Go figure. So we have a conflict between historic preservation, hello Bill Chapman, hello Don Hibbard, and going with the times, which is what DeSoto and I always say. And he's also very historic with his museum, of course, but he recognizes that you need evolution and modification for things. So you are actually showing up all over the place, Pedro, with Barcelona. This is another news media online for architects, Architizer. And, I have been similar. We want to point out, we did a show, Jay, that was when you first met me. And then you sent me back to Germany over the summer and said, continue doing these. And I went back with my Lenovo. We just had computer problems before with my Windows Lenovo laptop. And I tried to do shows, and I was only to record like 8 minutes, and then I had to push the button, and you see me walking towards, because I didn't even have remote, and I was too stupid to buy some external camera and things like that. And then you got rightly so mad at me because I was sending them back in pieces, and your producer had to stitch them together, and that was causing some interesting discussions between us. Anyways, that's all history, but thank you to you, and being forgiving, you put them all together. So this is something here in Hamburg that is actually now I'm having a lot these days to do, because my new dean, Moselle, that we can look forward to, her husband's family is from Hamburg. Also, I had my university preschools directors email me and saying, my daughter goes to architecture school. Can you recommend an architectural firm to do the intern in Hamburg? And then our youngest son was just coming back from Hamburg, and here's Annette. So everything gravitates around Hamburg these days here. Hamburg has done pretty much also what you guys have been doing with your 22 et district here, which the Architizer is pointing out. And then we had Martin Ansolini, our colleague, who's currently flying to Boston and giving a talk at Harvard real estate convention. So good luck. They need some education there too, certainly. And going to Harvard now is also a good time to go and be part of keeping Harvard running, obviously, right? Politically speaking. And you remember that he was sending that to us on our WhatsApp group that we have here, Pedro, Martin, and the other Martin. And he was just here hot off the press from this award here, that this building here has gotten an award. And of course, you had that building in your blog, and this is the building here that we want to point out. And we see, and something that we've been, trying to have the emerging generation, develop here, Jay, which is solid timber. That's all we have here. We are a timber island because there was no metal. So all they could do is use lava rock and, carve wood and build things out of wood. So we have a big wood tradition, but where did that go? Well, went down the drain with the missionaries coming and bringing stone and concrete and stuff like that, right? So it's really about time to do what almost seems to be like the standard. Is that fair to say? There's so many new projects out of solid timber or mass timber, Pedro, that it's almost becoming mainstream, which is great once the avant-garde becomes mainstream, right?
Yeah, we have a very interesting, and it's being used in many different kinds of buildings. And I would say that at least in Barcelona, this still feels like an experimental phase because it's not so mainstream yet. No, it's still a minority of projects that are using it, and we know that of course it does have certain limitations. For example, a height limitation. If you want to make a 10-story building, maybe you're pushing the limits. I think the highest one we have so far is 8 stories, which is pretty tall still. Well, depends on what you compare it with. I mean, the US, I think you're used to 20-story buildings and 30-story buildings. We don't have that much of those around here.
But that's actually good because we actually forgot to say that, and we will actually come full circle to towers soon. So thanks for getting ahead of ourselves with that. And I wanted to say, and it's great you remind us that actually from a economical and ecological point of view, the buildings you're talking about in the range from 6 to 9 stories, which you can still do in mass timber, is actually the optimum. Everything that is shorter is sprawl, and everything that's higher is high rise that we have here the problem, and it gets exponentially more expensive to build. Elevators, cranes and all this stuff. So what we're talking about, and Martin, I hope I can leak that because he's with HCDA, the Honolulu Community Development Agency, which you, Jay, said you wish him both the best, and the other. So he's going to shake that agency around with his energy that we know. And actually here, what's so close to your heart, Kaka'ako Makai, Jay, he's part of that. And that's what he tries to tell them, teach them, and saying, watch our shows and look at the perimeter block in Barcelona that is like that. And he tries to adopt that model for Kaka'ako Makai. How exciting is that, right? So right on, right on.
Well, Martin, let me go back to some of the points you were making earlier. Number one, it seems to me that it doesn't cost anything to transfer a design from Europe to Hawaii. It's as easy as email. So if you have a good design, you don't have to actually bring it here or make it there and transport the physical property. You can just send the plans, and that would be good if we could do that. Secondly, it seems to me that there are differentiations in Hawaii. For example, if you're concerned about shade, as you mentioned, you have to be careful about the wind, because if the wind comes and lifts the shade right off, then you've lost the shade. Secondly, you have these metal, relief columns that you showed on the roof. That would be fine, but I have a feeling that the Department of Planning and Permitting would have some issues with that. So it becomes a political problem, I think, for that, although it sounds like a great idea. And finally, it seems to me that these designs are very valuable in wood. And yes, Hawaii was active in wood. We had a lot of wood. And in I guess it was the 60s or the 70s, when developers were trying to use wood for pole houses and wooden structures, the unions got in the way. And they didn't like that at all. They wanted to use concrete. And somehow that's more attractive to a union. But it may not be that way anymore, because the Carpenters Union is very powerful in the state of Hawaii. And if you could sell the Carpenters Union on using the wood you're talking about, the more experimental uses of the wood as exists in Europe, they might catch on to that, and it'd be very attractive. But you have to blend the technology with the wood, because of course everyone knows we have termites, and so we have to be careful about using wood. But all these ideas are creative, useful ideas that ought to be considered by the architectural community as a way to refresh what we're doing here in Hawaii.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. And in many ways, I mean, responding, yes, 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 yes. I'm taking the students, our students, the Hawaii students, to us in Europe and in the fall. And instead in my alchemist chamber, which has samples of everything you're talking about, of wood, termite resistant wood, all these goodies, it's all in my alchemist chamber. And then Moselle's husband, Mark, who's an architect, is going to move into that. So, you know, it's all going to be good on all fronts. And there's so many of the 354, well, 53 ThinkTech shows that we had our guests talking about it. We had Kaylee Keano, who brought it to the most extreme reel, that he was going over, flying with his Delta airline miles because he had a job with them, you know, and he went to an Austrian company that I got him in touch with, who helped him to, you know, mock up things with a solid timber with their gun, the ligno lock, and he brought it all back. And then they had engineering testing. He came here. He did some with Ian Robertson at the School of Engineering. So this is all viable. He went to the Polynesian Culture Center, built a mock-up, he torched it, and he videoed it. So that Socrates Pratakos, who had won the show, Howard Wigg, these are the people within the government, right, that make sense. And they say, okay, you guys are not weird. This might look weird, but it's not, because you substantiate it and you back it up, right? And absolutely, you have to do modifications, but again, thanks to as close as possible climate as one can be, you know, in Europe, and also coastal at climate, you know, Barcelona gets close enough that we can really say, if this would be, if I come with the stuff where I'm from, you know, it's like, oh, this is in northern Germany, it gets really cold, you get a lot of snow, so that's a different animal, right? That's why we stopped doing that for a while and go to Barcelona, because, you know, it's similarly, you know, moderately tropical, and so you can really take a lot. But you're right on. You know, you can transport the ideas and then adopt and adapt the ideas. Absolutely. So moving on.
Let me integrate one other point, though, Martin. You started out with a discussion of housing, and housing is in a crisis point really all over the world. And how do we get here? I mean, that's worth a whole show by itself. How in the world did we get to a place where, you know, the human right of housing is not being met? But it seems to me that if a given community has creative housing, like the wood, like some of the work that Pedro has been doing in Barcelona, like some of the designs you've shown us over the years, it kind of stimulates the notion of housing. It says, you know, we care about shelter. We care about housing. Let's do more. And the stimulating effect, that seems to me, is part of bringing more housing to more people.
Absolutely. And I was like, well, thank you for reminding me of what I forgot, because when we were on the phone yesterday for other things, I told you that's how we wanted to start the show. I wanted to start the show. And luckily, at least you remembered and was now giving me that, because if you haven't noticed, if you go on and when it will be YouTube, it will be called different. It will be called the First Fundamental Freedom, First Amendment of Housing, because yes, when us guys, I mean, oversimplifying, us Howley guys came from Europe a couple 100 years ago, and some of them had the last name Trump, we were talking about, and Fred was the first name. And they were looking out for a better world. They basically came, and once they made it through like the White Plains, the heartland, which is my home away from home in Nebraska, I can still say that well, they realized, oh shit, this is actually more extreme than home. It looks like the same prairie, but it's actually way colder. So then thinking, as we were talking, was actually existential to survive that next harsh winter when these cold Arctic winds blow down. And they had to look at, guess whom? At the indigenous, who are now getting more discriminated again, unfortunately, through the government. And it's like, okay, can you please help us out? Or we need to look how you do things. So, in that area, it wasn't the nomads, the mobile nomads with the tippies as other tribes, but it was the earth home ones. So they basically had some spades brought with them, and they were sticking out blocks out of the soil. And while the prairie has nothing above, there were no trees back then, but there's a lot of grass and there's a lot of roots. So these roots were the rebar, and they figured this out and built these shelters that they built into the bluffs of the rolling hills of the White Plains, and safe they were, right? Only because of thinking, talking with and to indigenous about surviving. So that spirit we want back, right? And that's the fundamental right of shelter we're talking about. Thank you for reminding us of that, Jay. Absolutely. And so things have evolved. Pedro, you want to talk about this other of the many articles you have been?
Well, yeah, this one was dedicated to the new uses of timber in different kinds of buildings. We mentioned some housing buildings also. This particular one that we're seeing is an office building. In this case, it was not, it didn't use a wooden structure. We know the architects claimed they wanted to, but they decided it was too risky because of the height of the building. It's a little higher than the tallest wooden structured buildings we see in Barcelona. But on the other hand, they decided to use a very interesting finish on the outside, and it's a traditional Japanese treatment of wood. It's called charred wood, or the yakisogi. I think it's the Japanese name. And it basically increases the performance of wood in many ways, including fire resistance. It makes it more resistant to plagues, to termites, to fungi. So it's really interesting, and it's really elegant. I mean, the look of the building is like very nice. And there's only a couple of buildings so far that have used this building. There's this relatively large one, and there's a much smaller one that's in the outskirts of the city. So this one is the only one that's actually like very visible from within. And it's one more example of the possibilities, the wide range of possibilities of wood, that in some cases doesn't necessarily go through an invention, but just recovering or rescuing something that is traditional, that has been traditional in another country, and you say, hey, listen, we could use this perfectly well in Barcelona. Why can't we? And so far, it seems a very interesting solution.
Absolutely. I was just talking to my new dean, Mo, about it, and she was in the Alchemist Chamber and was happy to have her husband reside there. And she was excited about a sample of a similar but different that I've been heavily doing projects with about some more than 2 decades ago, this housing project. This is like the same, 4 or 5 stories, urban block, perimeter block. It actually closes or completes the corner of such a block. And we've been using this thermally modified timber, which is doing, baking through the whole substance. And again, we've been sharing that, Jay, yes, you pointed out. And at the top, more importantly, is how you can then adopt and adapt that for here in Hawaii. And this is Kalihi up there that I was talking about. And there's also Rainer Kiesling, who's currently in the trenches of finishing our talking. We also do a guide. We do a guidebook about Honolulu that we're working on, Pedro. So I'm kind of, we try to do what you do. So wish us luck. Hopefully we learned enough from you. So Rainer is pulling this all together. And Rainer, for his thesis, watch that show up there, has been doing this project also with mass timber. So absolutely. Here, back to that project again. Also, I see, something that we have on the island, especially by my favorite firm of Killingsworth and Ron Lindgren, the integrated planter troughs. So you actually have, as part of the balustrade, you have vegetation growing, which gives you a nicer feel about. And it's a very sort of a nice combination here of wooden cladding and siding, and they even clad, and this is you can see the parallel. I'm sympathetic because we did that here too. We clad the underbelly of the slabs as well as the decking with it. So it's the same kind of a strategy. It reminded me of that. So overall, again, yeah, very, as you just pointed out, there's things here. These integrated planet troughs is a Killingsworth theme. Look at the bottom left, that show quote here with Larry Stricker, who was the design partner on the Ihilani, which is the inaugural part of Ko'olina, which is now rebranded as Four Seasons. And look what's behind Ron is that ultimate of fenestration, which is actually vegetation, which grows, is bamboo. And behind that, it's a little hard to see, you have a curtain. So that's the difference. This is a significant difference. In Barcelona, maybe that might not be enough for all the seasons, but actually here in Honolulu, it could be or isn't the case, because I'm living it here. If you could look the other direction, because I just faked myself being into the awesome cooperative office, but I'm actually in the seashore here that has no fenestration. And here you see, these are the pictures I took from there. I called it torching, which is another way to explain it, because Mo was asking about it. What is it? And I explained the difference to her. And to explain it even more is a funny one, because, I'm the Jaeger fan, but Martin, don't do Hawaiiana flip-flops on Jaegers, which you see there. And I wasn't even driving. When I stopped to take the pictures you just saw of that building, I torched myself and I flipped over. And this is one of my little bruises, that wasn't killing me. But that's kind of how you can think about, that your original skin that ages, is like the charred. And then you see here someone scratched it. So you see down there is actually the untreated surface. And that's kind of the funny analogy here too. Me and our exotic escapism Susanna here coming over. Another project that the architects have been doing also substantially, solid timber, is also around, everything is, that's the amazing thing, Jay, right? Think of Kaka'ako, get romantic and sentimental about the lost opportunity, and don't worry, we're going to bring it back, I promised you, in a surprising way. But this is like you go from block to block, and there's one after the other of wowing you, right? This is basically like, we would call this sort of Makai, so towards the ocean, and not that very blocks away. And it's this project here. I don't know if you remember it sufficiently. I think it might have been in that article of yours, but if anything. So as you can see, this is actually a solid timber building on the inside. And then it has rain screen and it has shading on it, but this is almost doing the opposite, right? The outside is not wood, but the inside is wood. And this is, this is a kind of a high end, Porsche thing there here, but you see the heaviness of the timber, and this is all basically laminated timber in an urban setting. So we're about Jay, we were saying we're overdue. We're so ripe for this. We've been talking about this with the experts of Socrates, who's in charge. And he says solid timber, I totally understand. I have no fear of that. In fact, less fear than most of the other construction systems here, because solid timber has a really, really good fire rating ratio. Something also maybe to pour a little bit of whatever into that sweet wine here. Whenever they start to brand, this project is probably now completed, but like the bragging of the first carbon neutral office building in Barcelona, that's something I'm kind of little hesitant then, because if I see, all this like putting it together with like concrete and brick infill and then steel, steel really doesn't have a good carbon footprint, because it's heavy, it has to be mined, and then you have to come up with thousands of degrees to melt it, right? So, it's you should be watching out. I mean, the previous projects, don't judge a book by the cover. That's, I guess, and there is a lot of greenwashing going on. And I had the feeling maybe I'm unfair, but by going by that one, I thought like, okay, maybe not every project, but many projects, right? I don't know. What's your thought on that, Pedro? Can you
Yeah, but I really haven't explored to what point there's but I'm guessing that everybody wants to claim at least that they're trying to do green buildings.
Yeah.
Then I want to hope that, for example, the LEED certificates are genuine, because we have a lot of them lately. You know, a lot of buildings that have the gold certificate, the platinum certificate, and I think the fact that there a lot of architects are aiming for this, I think it's a very positive thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's really become like a super important concern for architects nowadays. No, that their building should get at least the silver LEED certificate, which is not the highest, of course. And a lot of them, they do brag about when they publish a new building, for example, if the building received a gold or a platinum certificate, they make sure to show it. The one we saw before, the one with the black charred wood cladding, that one, for example, has a gold certificate. And that same firm has another building that is maybe a little less attractive from an aesthetic point of view, but it was built almost at the same time as this one, and that one does have the platinum certificate, for example.
Yeah.
So it's becoming something that architects talk a lot about. This is the greenest building in Barcelona, and it's really not.
Yeah. And along these lines, you know, in our book about Honolulu that we're in the final sprint, the younger the years, the lesser the projects we have, unfortunately, because we've been deprived. This is a good example because I try to be an okay scholar and caption and show the source and the architects to credit. This one here, I couldn't reconstruct the authorship, which is bad on my side, but it speaks again for the high quality on your side, because this is just one other building exactly in that same neighborhood, only a few blocks away from the previous one. That, Jay, wouldn't we be very excited? This would probably be in the book and conclude the book and saying, hey, really ambitious, large lanais, you know, a lot of shading, a lot of greenery. This seems to like doing it right. We don't have any of that in the recent developments. And here it's just one of many, and even one that isn't even like published size, like all over the place. Usually the other projects, you Google for them and they pop up. This one here, sorry, you know, I'm sorry, I mean, on my end. But again, it's a good thing that what I'm saying, what you're saying, you know, green and ecological becomes more, or the people are aimed more to become the standard, and also good architecture that it sort of creates is also becoming the standard here. So we're now,
and it calls out to you, this architecture.
Yeah.
If you're walking or driving by and you look at a building like that,
exactly,
it's your first question that occurs to you, and it's a lasting question, is, gee, I'd like to live in that building.
Yeah.
I would make compromises and sacrifices to live in that building.
Yeah.
And I think that's that stimulating effect
Exactly.
that I was talking about. The other thing, you know, I'm so glad that Pedro mentioned the Japanese fire-resistant material, because it's Japanese. It has a Japanese design about it, a patina of Japaneseness. It would be very popular here in Hawaii, and would be very effective, because, as you said, Martin, you've got to find a way to make it fire resistant. And people get concerned, you know, that it might burn down, who knows what. So that material as fire resistant would be very valuable. Also, I think your thought about having large pieces of wood, large sections of wood, make the building more fire resistant.
Yeah.
You'd have to sell that to people. That's part of the
I know.
sales and the whole notion of stimulating interest. But I think those materials have a lot to do with housing.
Yeah. And while here, you know, to me, this building, and rightly so, Jay, you just drive by, you hit the brake, you say, well, this is interesting. And why is it interesting? It's very Hawaii to me, because it has a lot of overhangs for shading you on the ground floor there, for the sun and the rain. Look, it has the same up there, this big loggia, the sky loggia, with this might be photovoltaics or some shading, and the huge lanais on every floor with a huge greenery. And the only thing is like, I think it must be a brick, a veneer kind of cladding. And that's why I put it back to back with this project here, which is getting us finally actually to your most recent article that you had to finish one of the last couple of shows, and you were in the final trenches for that one. And so we announced it already, but finally here it is. So that's the most recent of your articles that we want to celebrate and share. So tell us more about all the goodies that are in there, and kind of what the specific district within that, larger 22 area is.
Yeah, so, well, what we decided to do in the previous article where we talked about social housing, we mentioned a lot of projects because there's a lot going on. And we thought maybe we could use this idea and go by neighborhoods or districts because there's really a lot of interesting projects. And this would also give us the opportunity to analyze and present the projects in a little more detail. So we decided to only work with the San Marti district, and we ended up just choosing 3 projects. We have to say that one of them was a request by the architect team because they had like a signed agreement that their project should first be published. It wasn't even complete. And they had a signed agreement with a magazine that they were the first ones that would publish the complete building, etc. So they asked us, please, can you include us in a later edition? But beside this, no, we chose basically 3 relatively different social housing projects. The first one being this one, no, that it's a building that at first glance doesn't look really like social housing, and it has like a little retro look because it has the horizontal windows that are something that was very typical of earlier modern architecture. And combined with the brick, I was commenting on the article that it had like this slightly Alvar Aalto look to it. And one of the interesting things, the most interesting things about this building, the building itself is interesting, but it was the way it was positioned within the block, because it's like in the center of the block, and it's surrounded by gardens on 2 sides. And on top of this, these are subs gardens. No, these can't remember exactly this. These are urban systems of recycling water that are becoming more and more important when you're designing parks, etc. No, so you have, for example, reservoirs for rain, no, that are interconnected to some underground reservoirs, and this kind of thing is super important in places, especially in places where it doesn't rain that much, actually, no, because we do get rain once in a while, but it's not that much. So if whenever it does rain, we can save this water, even if it's just for watering gardens. So it's a very I think it's very nice, and the spaces really the spaces adjacent to this building are very nice, and there's like even these transparencies under the building, so you can see the garden on the other side from the standing in the other garden.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're moving on to and there's my favorite firm again. You see it down there. Here, Martin was doing his homework, and I was captioning here by who it is. And this is the firm Lacolle. Now I can say it rightly, that I'm sitting in her office virtually. And they did it together with this other firm, La Boqueria. I'm butchering that, but hopefully close enough, right? So tell us more about.
Close.
All right. Tell us more about this one here. And this gets me going a lot here when I look at the big picture, but you go ahead because you know the most about it.
This is another cooperative building, because one of the interesting things about this firm is that they themselves work as a cooperative, but among their favorite projects are cooperative housing buildings. So they're projects where they get the future tenants or owners involved directly in the process. And there are of course projects that have a very important concern with several things. One of them is the environmental issues. So they're very careful, for example, when they decide how to protect each side of the building from excessive noise or from excessive sun, etc., then they're using this cross-laminated timber, which is the structural material that this firm used for this project. I can't recall exactly if they used it in the other their other famous building, La Borda. I think
They did. They
actually.
did.
Yeah,
They did.
they
We
did.
can go back. We reported on it so many moons ago, right?
So in this case, the only thing I can't remember right now if in the other project, but in this one, what they did is they did the first story with reinforced concrete to
Yeah.
give it like a more solid base, and from the second story upward, all the structure is cross-laminated timber. So we have this, and the final thing that is super important for these architects is well, final no, because there's many things. I'm remembering that Monty Python and the Spanish Inquisition, when they keep adding virtues to the Spanish Inquisition. And in this case, it's virtues. I'm adding virtues to the project because I was going to say, as the last thing, that they're very concerned about the public areas, the public spaces between the apartments or connecting to the apartments. In this case, for example, we're seeing it's just supposed to be like a corridor, like an access corridor. And if you look at it, it's really a very pleasant space to be. I mean, there's people sitting there reading. You have plants, you have tables, you have chairs. So there is this deliberate idea that these spaces shouldn't just be corridors. They're spaces like extensions, exterior extensions of the apartments, and they're places that are for the community. They're for everybody. They're people, spaces where you can talk to your neighbors, have a coffee with them, etc. And the other thing that I remembered later is also that there's an interesting flexibility within the apartments that, of course, have been partly discussed with the future tenants. No, but it's also important that even if you talk to them, that you have a certain amount of flexibility because this is important. You're not necessarily going to want to live the same way for the rest of your life. So whenever you can introduce in living spaces this possibility of change, that you don't require to call again the architects and say, hey, I decided I want an extra room or I want to get rid of this one. I want to join these two spaces, etc. So you don't need to call the architects again and like restart the project.
I see you, Jay, smiling so much. I think you believe this is very Hawaii, right? Or should be.
Well, I believe it's very humane, if you will, and it should exist everywhere.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of having green space between the buildings, even larger green spaces than you see in this photo, and making them into public spaces, which we have talked about many times about how important that is for quality of life and quality of community, if you will, political community. Very important to have that. I'd just like to mention that probably the most gratifying space I have ever seen. And I'm sorry, Pedro, this was not in Barcelona. This was about a block away from the Duomo in Florence. Okay? And there were these 18th, 19th century buildings there. They'd been renovated into residences and hotels. And they surrounded, of course, on one side, you had to have a church. Okay, absolutely. It's Italy, after all, right? On the other side, there was this green park with places to sit. Sitting is important. And finally, there were bodegas and ice cream stores around the park. And in terms of being a gratifying place to be and having the Duomo only a short distance, it was like great design. And I think that, you have to look beyond the building itself into that design. And let me add one more point before I stop. And that is when you talk about the right of humanity to have housing and shelter, what goes hand in glove with that is food. Food. I mean, a bodega, any kind of restaurant, any kind. You had a photograph of a convertible dance hall kind of bar early on in this discussion. And I thought that was just great. That attracts people. It becomes a public space, but it's also food because food attracts humanity. Food sends the messages. This is a comfortable place for you. You can enjoy this and you can meet your neighbors. And I think that's so important in the design of any community.
Absolutely. And your pineapple Hawaiian shirt reminds me of the Breakers Hotel here, where Ethel Nada, the manager, who has been managing it since 1954, go figure, do the math. And so Yusen Guzman is the landscaper, the original, he's the son of the original. And they grow little baby pineapples in the planter troughs of the hotel rooms, right? So this is all island tradition. And this building here reminds me so much of a show we did moons ago about social senior housing, actually tall building, high rise. It's at the beginning of Kalakaua Avenue, close to Baratenia, where one of our students said, hey, my granny lives there. And we visited her and the whole show is about that. And it's very close to the same concept here. Also orientation, this is the north arrow, isn't there? It's very small, but it's there, it's facing south. So this is, again, being shaded, you know, in the summertime, especially. In the wintertime, you even get a little bit of a solar gain, which you need a little bit in Barcelona, not so much here. And that widening that space and making it more than just the corridor, as you said, you make it occupational space, you have these nooks. So this is absolutely homecoming. People watch that show. I'm sorry I didn't show quote it, which I usually do, but I will do this after the fact for next week and remind you of that one. But this is all basically homecoming here. We had that, Jay, and we just need it back, and that's the difficult part. That right? But that's what we're doing this. And thanks for reminding us, Pedro. I think as exciting as it is, but we better make a cut here because otherwise it gets too long as to you processing it, Jay, and for everyone to watch it. But we're gonna continue right after this one here because you said there is at least 3 projects in. So we have seen 1.5 because I think there is one more picture of this one here in there, but we leave that for next time. So until then, stay as, you know, mentally innovative as all this here is. This reminds me of DeSoto usually has this dog. So whose dog is this now? It's yours,
that's my baby, Emily.
All right, Emily. Yeah, you and DeSoto have your doggy theme going on. That's very cool. That's like letting you know flora and fauna in, right? I have the birds here with me all the time that come in and out. So don't block out nature. Make nature an integral part of it, and in all aspects, both from a solar point of view and from a social point of view. This is amazing. This is refreshing. Thank you, Pedro. Thanking Jay for thinking this is what we need here. So more of that in about 2 weeks because we're on a 2-week rhythm. Next week is, again, how did we get here with DeSoto? So watch that too. Awesome show as well. See you in 2 weeks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Pedro.